The wind cut across the icy plains like a knife. Snow swirled in blinding sheets, coating everything in white. Captain Rylan Hayes tightened his coat around him, wishing he had brought a thicker one. His boots sank into the frozen ground with every step, and the cold bit through his gloves, making his fingers numb. He had been sent on a survey mission to the remote planet of Vera 9, a place humans had just begun to explore. The planet was notorious for its harsh climate, and Rylan had known it would be dangerous, but nothing had prepared him for this storm. He squinted through the storm, scanning the horizon for any signs of life or equipment left from previous missions. His sensors had picked up a faint heat signature earlier, but it had vanished before he could get a fix. Now, moving carefully over the ice, he noticed a slight movement ahead. Something small and shivering hunched over in the snow. Rylan hurried closer, his boots crunching against the frozen crust. As he approached, he saw a young woman crouched low, her thin clothing completely inadequate against the brutal cold. She looked no older than 20, with pale skin and hair so dark it almost blended with the shadows cast by the storm. Her lips were blue, and her teeth chattered violently. Rylan's instincts screamed at him. No one could survive long in this weather without proper protection. "Hey," he called, though his voice was almost lost to the wind. "Come here, you'll freeze out here." "You need help." "Yes, thank you," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost musical, but weak from the cold. Rylan scanned the area, looking for shelter. There was nothing but the endless frozen plains, no caves, no structures, nothing to shield them from the storm. He knew they had to find something fast, or they wouldn't survive the night. "There's a supply pod about 2 kilometers from here," he said. "It's an old human outpost. We can get there before it gets worse." The snow was slippery, and the hidden patches of ice made every movement a risk. But Rylan's determination never wavered. He had trained for extreme conditions, and he would not leave anyone behind. As they walked, the woman finally spoke, her voice barely audible over the storm. "You didn't have to stop for me. Nobody deserves to freeze like this. It doesn't matter who you are." It was small and battered, half buried in snow, but it offered the only chance of shelter. Rylan led the way, pushing open the hatch and helping the woman inside. The interior was cold but significantly warmer than the outside, and he quickly activated the heating system. A low hum filled the small space, and steam from the heaters began to rise. She sank to the floor, curling up slightly, still shivering. Rylan pulled out extra thermal blankets from his pack and wrapped her tightly. "You'll be okay now, just rest." "That's enough reason." He unpacked his portable scanner and started checking the surrounding area. There was still a faint heat signature nearby, one that wasn't human. Rylan frowned, adjusting the scanner. Whatever it was moving closer, and it didn't look friendly. He returned to the woman. "We're not completely safe yet. There's something out there, and I need to make sure it doesn't find us." "Ways to survive." Her voice was cautious, but there was a strength underneath it, a confidence she tried to hide. Rylan smiled faintly. Humans had always relied on resourcefulness, and he could see it in her. Even shivering and weak, she had presence, intelligence, and determination. The hours passed slowly with the storm raging outside. Rylan kept the scanner running and fortified the pod as best he could. He set up small alarms made from his portable tech to detect movement, and he double-checked the locks on the hatch. The woman watched him quietly, sometimes offering small suggestions that improved his setups. By late night, the storm began to ease slightly. Snow still fell, but the wind had lessened. Rylan allowed himself a small sigh of relief. He glanced at the woman, now curled under the blankets, her breathing steady. She had survived the first test, but he knew the worst might be yet to come. "You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow we'll figure out how to get you off this planet safely. I won't let anything happen to you." "Thank you for the coat," she whispered. Rylan chuckled softly. "It's nothing. A coat can save a life, and tonight that's exactly what it did." And somehow he knew that together they could endure whatever Vera 9 threw at them. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the hum of the heating system and the occasional groan of the pod settling in the ice. Rylan stayed awake, monitoring the scanners, thinking about the strange twist of fate that had led him to this moment. A simple act of kindness, a coat given in the cold, had brought someone extraordinary into his life, though he did not yet know her true identity. The first part of their story was over, but the journey had only begun. The woman slept peacefully, unaware of the dangers that still lurked outside. Rylan stayed vigilant, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. He knew one thing for certain. Humanity's resilience, courage, and kindness had already made a difference tonight, and whatever came next, they would face it together, as allies and perhaps as friends. Somewhere deep in the storm, a faint signal pulsed, unnoticed by anyone but the most attentive sensors. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried a message. The galaxy was watching, and the choices of one human and one mysterious woman might have consequences far beyond the icy plains of Vera 9. Rylan didn't know it yet, but he had just begun a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about survival, loyalty, and the strength of the human spirit. And for now, that coat, a simple gift against the cold, was the first step toward a story that would change the galaxy. Morning broke slowly on Vera 9, though the storm had left the sky gray and heavy. The frozen plains stretched endlessly, sparkling faintly under the dim light. Captain Rylan Hayes stirred from his watchful rest. The woman in the thermal coat slept still, her breathing even, but he could see the faint tension in her face. She was clearly not used to the harsh conditions of this planet, yet she had survived the night. That alone impressed him. Rylan checked the pod's sensors and instruments. Outside, the snow had begun to settle, leaving a crusty layer over the ground. The alien patrols he had noticed the night before were gone, for now, but he knew they might return. He had to plan their next move carefully. He crouched beside her, careful not to wake her. "You'll need food and water soon," he said softly. "We'll have to start moving after you eat." "Where are we?" she asked, her voice still weak. "An old human outpost," Rylan explained. "We're safe for the moment, but we can't stay here forever. I need to get you somewhere more secure." Rylan could see that she was used to command, though she hid it beneath shyness and caution. He didn't press for her story just yet. Trust had to be earned. "Do you know how to survive in this cold?" he asked gently. "I have some experience," she said. "Not like this, but I've learned ways to stay alive. I know when to move and when to wait." Humans had always relied on resourcefulness, and this woman, whoever she was, had it in abundance. He prepared some rations from the pod's supplies and gave her a small portion. She ate quietly, taking small bites, careful not to waste the food. As she ate, Rylan examined her more closely. Her clothing was odd, not like the typical attire of explorers or scientists. It was elegant, with subtle embroidery that hinted at wealth or status, but it had been worn and dirtied by travel. He frowned, wondering who she really was, but he kept his questions for later. For now, survival came first. After eating, they prepared to leave. Rylan equipped her with a lighter cloak from his supplies and adjusted the thermal coat to fit her smaller frame. She looked hesitant but trusted him enough to move forward. They stepped outside, the wind still sharp but less violent than before. Rylan scanned the horizon with his binoculars. No movement, no alien patrols yet. They began to walk, careful to follow the faint trail of a frozen river that could lead them to safer terrain. As they moved, the woman started speaking more, though cautiously. "You're different from the others I've met," she said. "Most humans, I don't know, you seem kind but also strong. But I've rarely met anyone like you." He had learned through years of exploration that survival was as much about planning as courage. After a few hours, they reached the edge of a rocky ridge. The terrain changed here, offering more protection from the wind. Rylan suggested they rest briefly. As they huddled behind the rocks, he finally asked the question that had been on his mind. "Who are you?" he asked gently. "You've been careful about your story, but I think it's time you tell me. We can't survive together if I don't know what I'm dealing with." "My realm, it's in danger. My family, my people." Her voice trembled, but only for a moment before she steeled herself. "I'm trying to survive." She was no longer just a stranger. She was someone he needed to protect, and she had begun to rely on him. They resumed their journey, moving carefully across the icy plains. Along the way, they encountered signs of alien activity, disturbed snow, faint footprints, and strange, geometric shapes etched into the ice. Rylan paused to examine them. These were patrols, but they were cautious, avoiding detection. Whoever they were watching humans closely. Rylan knew they couldn't outrun them forever. They had to be smarter. He started devising a plan in his mind. He would use the terrain to their advantage, setting traps, creating diversions, and using their knowledge of human ingenuity to stay ahead. Princess Alara watched him with growing admiration. "You're clever," she said. "I've studied many alien worlds, but I've never seen humans adapt so quickly." They reached a frozen canyon, a narrow path between towering ice cliffs. Rylan knew it was risky, but it offered a hiding place if they needed to evade patrols. "Stay close," he whispered. "We'll move carefully. One mistake here and the wind or the ice could be fatal." Rylan was amazed at her adaptability. She was learning quickly, absorbing his techniques and anticipating dangers he hadn't even pointed out. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shifted slightly, a hidden crevasse. Rylan grabbed her arm and pulled her back just in time. She stumbled but did not fall. "Thank you," she whispered. "Always watch your step," Rylan said. "This planet doesn't forgive mistakes, and it's easier to defend if needed." Together, they worked efficiently, a team learning to rely on each other in extreme circumstances. As night fell, Rylan set up a small perimeter alarm system using sensors and reflective markers to detect movement. The princess watched, fascinated. "You really think of everything," she said. "I have to," Rylan replied. "The universe doesn't wait for anyone." Before sleep claimed them, Princess Alara spoke softly. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect humans to care so much about strangers." "Then I am lucky," she whispered. Rylan watched her sleep, feeling a quiet resolve. This princess, stranded in a hostile world, was now under his protection, and he would do everything in his power to ensure she survived, no matter the dangers ahead. Somewhere far above, unnoticed, a faint signal flickered. It pulsed across space, a silent marker of the unusual pairing below. Humans and royalty, strangers brought together by circumstance, facing a cold world that demanded courage, intelligence, and trust. Rylan knew one thing with certainty. This was only the beginning. The galaxy was full of dangers, but with ingenuity, resilience, and compassion, humans could endure anything. And tonight, in the frozen canyon of Vera 9, that truth had begun to shine. The night was quiet, but the quiet was dangerous. Captain Rylan Hayes stayed alert, his eyes scanning the icy horizon from their makeshift shelter. Princess Alara had fallen asleep early, exhausted from the day's journey and the harsh conditions. Rylan didn't mind the cold. He had endured far worse on other worlds. But tonight, the stillness made him uneasy. He could sense movement beyond the cliffs, faint traces of heat that didn't belong to them. Alien scouts, watching from a distance, perhaps already tracking them from earlier that day. Rylan knew they were clever, but humans were unpredictable. That unpredictability had kept humanity alive for centuries, and tonight it would serve them again. By dawn, the princess awoke, shivering slightly despite the thick coat and blankets. Rylan handed her a warm drink he had heated using the small heater in the shelter. She sipped slowly, her eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting danger at every turn. "Are we safe?" she asked softly. "For now," Rylan replied. "But we can't stay here long. The aliens are fast and they're persistent. We need a plan. We'll need every advantage we can get." The frozen plains stretched endlessly, but Rylan had spotted a series of ice ridges that could give them cover from aerial patrols and sensors. The first hours were tense. Every crunch of snow, every gust of wind could mask approaching enemies. Rylan moved deliberately, scanning and listening. Alara matched his movements perfectly, her own instincts sharpened by careful observation. The partnership was growing, trust was building. After a while, they reached a narrow valley where the ice formed natural walls. The path was treacherous, but it provided the perfect hiding place if the scouts came too close. Rylan stopped, crouching behind a mound of ice, and gestured for Alara to do the same. "They're close," he whispered. "I can see their sensors moving in the distance. They're scanning, trying to predict our route." Rylan rigged a few heat-emitting decoys from leftover electronics and rations, placing them in the snow to create false trails. Alara positioned herself to move silently, guiding Rylan along a path that would keep them out of the main patrol route. The alien scouts were cautious, but they had never dealt with humans quite like this. One by one, the decoys were detected, leading the scouts into dead ends and false tracks. Rylan watched through his binoculars, amazed at the princess's understanding of tactical advantage. She had an intuition for positioning, predicting enemy behavior almost instinctively. Hours passed, and they continued moving across the icy terrain. Rylan noted hidden crevices and covered paths that could provide shelter in an emergency. Alara helped identify edible plants and small pockets of warmth trapped beneath the snow. Her knowledge of survival, combined with his technical expertise, made them a formidable pair. As night approached, they found a natural cave carved into the ice. It was narrow and dark, but it would protect them from the wind and allow them to rest. Rylan checked it thoroughly for stability before allowing Alara to enter. They huddled inside, sharing rations and conserving heat. "You're better than most humans I've met," Alara said quietly, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of his scanner. "Your mind, your instinct, it's impressive." We survive because we have to, but it's not just me. Humans work together, that's how we overcome impossible odds. We adapt and we help each other. That's why we're still here despite everything. It saved my chance to survive. Rylan hoped that unpredictability would give them an advantage when the time came. Morning arrived, bringing a pale sun that barely warmed the icy plains. They left the cave, moving cautiously toward higher ground. Rylan spotted a frozen plateau that would give them a better vantage point to plan their next move. Alara helped navigate, pointing out weaknesses in the ice and hidden snowdrifts that could hide them from sensors. As they approached the plateau, Rylan suddenly stopped. A heat signature appeared on the scanner, larger than the scouts they had evaded so far. Something was moving quickly toward them. He squinted through the ice goggles and his stomach tightened. It was not human. The creature, tall, sleek, and metallic-looking, moved with precision, scanning everything in its path. It was a reconnaissance drone, advanced beyond anything humans had built. "We need to hide," Rylan whispered urgently. "Now." The drone passed overhead, scanning but detecting nothing unusual. Rylan and Alara held their breath, frozen in place. The drone continued, eventually moving away. "That was close," Alara whispered. Rylan exhaled slowly. "Too close, but it shows their limits. They rely on technology. We rely on intelligence. That's the difference. We don't get to survive by thinking one step at a time. Humans have always planned for what comes next." Alara contributed her own knowledge, guiding him past natural hazards and identifying areas that could be used to their advantage. Hours later, they reached a small valley surrounded by jagged ice cliffs. It was a hidden pocket, shielded from the wind and largely invisible to sensors. Rylan allowed them both to rest, setting up alarms and checking for hidden dangers. "You've taught me something," Alara said quietly. "Humans, they are not just clever, they are resilient. You don't give up even when everything seems impossible." The trust between them had grown, and with it, a bond stronger than either of them had expected. The night grew colder, but Rylan and Alara were prepared. The traps were set, the perimeter secured, and their minds alert. They knew the alien scouts would return, but now they had a plan. Humans had survived far worse than this, using intelligence, courage, and teamwork. And now Princess Alara would see firsthand what it meant to rely on human ingenuity. Somewhere in the distance, the alien scouts regrouped, unaware that they had been outsmarted. Rylan and Alara remained hidden, observing, waiting for the right moment to continue their journey. It was dangerous, uncertain, and exhausting, but they were alive. And together they had a chance to survive the threats of Vera 9 and beyond. Rylan looked at the princess, now resting against the ice wall. "We've made it this far," he said softly, "but the real challenge is just beginning." Humans, Rylan thought, were capable of amazing things. Their ability to adapt, to plan, to survive against impossible odds, it was what set them apart. And tonight, that truth would keep them alive as the galaxy watched. For the first time since they met, Rylan allowed himself a moment of hope. Together, they could outsmart, outlast, and overcome whatever dangers awaited them. And that hope, born from a simple act of kindness, a coat given in the snow, had already changed everything. The morning sun was pale, struggling to break through the thick gray clouds that covered the sky. Captain Rylan Hayes stood at the edge of the icy plateau, scanning the frozen horizon. The alien scouts had not returned yet, but he knew they were patient. They would not give up easily. Humans, however, had a history of persistence and cleverness, and that persistence had brought him and Princess Alara this far. Alara stirred behind him, rubbing her eyes and stretching slightly. She had slept fitfully, alert even in rest. Her expression was one of determination, as if the trials of the planet had awakened something inside her. She was no longer just a frightened survivor. She was a strategist in her own right, learning from Rylan and observing the threats around them. "We should move," Rylan said. "The valley is secure for now, but it won't last long. We need to reach higher ground where we can plan our next steps." They began the climb toward the higher ridges, moving carefully across the icy slopes. Each step required attention. The wind had shifted overnight, carrying hidden patches of ice that could easily send them sliding down the cliffs. Rylan led the way, checking each foothold before committing his weight. Alara followed, her balance steady, mirroring his movements. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional crunch of snow underfoot and the whisper of wind. Rylan used the time to teach Alara some of the survival tricks humans relied on. He showed her how to identify safe ice patches, how to detect subtle shifts in the wind that indicated approaching danger, and how to use reflective surfaces to signal without revealing their position. "You think faster than I expected," Alara said quietly during a break. "I've studied tactics for years, but your instincts, they're something else." "They underestimate you." But Rylan noticed movement, small figures gliding across the ice, almost invisible against the bright surface. "Alien scouts." "They're coming," he said, crouching behind a jagged ice outcrop. "And they're moving faster than yesterday." He had a plan, but it was risky. They would have to use the terrain, their knowledge of human ingenuity, and their understanding of the aliens' predictable behavior. He quickly set up a series of small traps using leftover sensors and reflective panels, designed to confuse the alien thermal scanners. He also rigged a few noisemakers that would trigger when stepped on, drawing attention away from their true path. Alara helped, her hands steady and precise, placing decoys in positions that only someone with her understanding of strategy could determine. When the scouts reached the ridge, their sensors were fooled. They scanned the decoys, checking for life signs, while Rylan and Alara slipped silently along a hidden path that led behind the cliffs. Every movement required patience, focus, and coordination. One wrong step could reveal them. Hours later, they reached a natural cave deep in the cliffs. It was hidden from aerial scans and offered excellent protection from the wind. Rylan checked the structural stability before allowing them to enter. They huddled inside, wrapping themselves in the thermal coat and blankets. "You're remarkable," Alara said quietly. "I've seen rulers, soldiers, and warriors, but I've never seen someone survive like this with intelligence, patience, and courage combined. We survive by thinking, by planning, and by caring for one another. It's not just physical strength that matters, it's how we use our minds. That's what makes you dangerous to those who underestimate you." Every decision had to be calculated. Late in the afternoon, they resumed their journey, moving along the cliff's edge. Rylan pointed out subtle paths and hidden pockets where they could rest safely. Alara learned quickly, observing and anticipating dangers, her confidence growing with each step. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Rylan set up a small perimeter alarm system, using sensors to detect movement and reflective panels to mislead any approaching scouts. They were ready, but he knew the real test would come soon. The night was long and tense. Faint shadows moved across the ice below, scouts circling and scanning. But thanks to their traps and careful planning, none came close. Rylan and Alara stayed awake, alert, and ready. Around midnight, a distant sound reached them, a low hum unlike any natural wind or snow movement. Rylan's eyes widened. "That's not the scouts," he whispered. "Something bigger, something advanced. We need to be ready." Humans thrived on unpredictability, and that would be their advantage. He whispered instructions to Alara, and together they set a series of diversions and traps, using mirrors and reflective surfaces to confuse the sensors. They moved with precision, staying out of sight while guiding the machine's path away from their location. The alien machine paused, scanning carefully, but it was fooled by the clever arrangement. It moved on, its path diverted, giving them the opportunity to advance further along the cliffs. Alara looked at Rylan with a mixture of awe and respect. "Your mind, it's like a weapon," she said. "You don't just react, you plan, anticipate, and control the situation." Humans survive by thinking. We rely on instinct, experience, and intelligence. The aliens may be stronger, faster, or better equipped, but they cannot predict every choice we make. It was a rare opportunity. They could rest, eat, and plan their next move without constant fear of immediate attack. They huddled near the stream, melting ice for water and gathering what little food they could find. Alara helped identify edible plants and small animals hiding under the snow. Rylan watched her, impressed. Even in these harsh conditions, she was learning quickly, becoming a competent partner and a survivor in her own right. "This place is safe for a while," Rylan said, "but we can't forget the scouts. They're still out there observing, learning. I know you'll find a way to keep us safe." Rylan and Alara slept fitfully, prepared to move at a moment's notice. By dawn, they were ready to continue. The princess now understood what humans could do, not just survive, but outsmart and overcome challenges far greater than themselves. And Rylan knew that with her growing strength and intelligence, they were more than a survivor and a protector. They were a team. The frozen world of Vera 9 had tested them both, and they had proven themselves capable. But Rylan knew the real challenges were ahead, larger threats, political intrigue, and the greater dangers of the galaxy. Tonight, they had survived. Tomorrow, they would face even greater tests. And as they moved forward, the bond between human and princess had grown stronger, forged in cold, danger, and trust. Humanity's ingenuity, resilience, and courage shone brightly in the frozen wasteland, and that light would guide them through the trials still to come. The sky over Vera 9 looked different that morning. The clouds were thinner and a pale blue light spread across the frozen valley. Captain Rylan Hayes stood quietly near the edge of the plateau, watching the distant horizon. The air was still cold, but something had changed. It was not the weather. It was the feeling that the long chase was coming to an end. Princess Alara stepped beside him, pulling the familiar thermal coat tighter around herself. The coat had become more than protection from the cold. It was a reminder of how everything had begun. "They are close," she said softly. "Not just scouts, something more." This was no longer a hunt. It was an observation. The aliens were watching, learning, trying to understand how two fragile beings had survived so long on a planet that defeated most explorers. "They're curious now," Rylan said. "That's good for us. Curious minds hesitate." The frozen world had shaped her, hardened her, and taught her to trust her own strength. Humanity had played a part in that transformation. They packed their remaining supplies and moved down into the valley, toward the geothermal stream. Rylan had noticed something the night before, an old human emergency beacon, half buried under ice and stone. It was damaged, but not dead. With time and creativity, it could still work. "This might be our way out," Rylan said as he knelt beside the frozen device. "It's old, but humans built it to survive disasters." Alara held components steady with steady hands, learning as she watched. It took hours, but slowly the beacon came back to life, its light blinking weakly at first, then stronger. A signal shot upward, invisible to the eye but loud across space. The aliens noticed immediately. The ground trembled faintly as several advanced machines appeared at the edge of the valley. They did not attack. They stopped watching, observing. Rylan stepped forward slowly, making no sudden movements. Alara stood beside him, tall and unafraid. "They want to see what we do," Alara said quietly. "Then we show them who humans are," Rylan replied. He activated the beacon's external display, projecting a simple message: no threats, no demands, just coordinates, identification, and a request for contact. The alien machines processed this. Their sensors flickered, adjusting. They had expected fear, perhaps panic. What they saw instead was calm cooperation and confidence. Minutes passed, then something unexpected happened. One of the machines projected a response. It was basic, mechanical, but clear. Human behavior recorded, survival probability exceeded projections. Reason, cooperation, adaptation, empathy. They simply observed, recording everything. As the ship landed, a small team stepped out, stunned by what they saw. A human explorer and an alien princess standing together, alive, calm, unbroken. Rylan helped Alara aboard the ship, but before entering, she turned back toward the watching machines. "This world tested us," she said calmly, "and humanity passed." As the ship lifted off, Vera 9 shrank below them, its frozen plains no longer a prison but a proving ground. On board, Alara finally rested in warmth, wrapped once more in the coat that had saved her life. Medical scans showed she was strong, resilient, and healthy, stronger than anyone expected. Rylan sat nearby, exhausted but satisfied. "You didn't just survive," Alara said after a long silence. "You changed how they see humanity." Their conclusions were clear. Humans were not weak. Humans were not simple. Humans were dangerous in a way that could not be calculated. Princess Alara returned to her realm with human escort. The coup that had forced her to flee collapsed under political pressure and unexpected alliances. When she took her place as ruler, her first act was to open diplomatic relations with humanity. Not as subjects, not as tools, but as equals. At the formal meeting, Alara stood before a chamber filled with representatives from dozens of worlds. "I survived because of a human," she said clearly. "Not because of power or weapons, but because of kindness, intelligence, and courage. Ignore humans at your own risk. Respect them, and you gain allies who will stand with you in the coldest storms." It's done more traveling than I have. And on a frozen world once meant to break them, a simple act of warmth had proven what it truly meant to be human. The end of the journey had become the beginning of something far greater.